Adding strokes to our artwork is another fun and easy process, but there are some very cool new options in Illustrator CS5 that make things much easier. Let's take a look at using the distribute function to place lines in our artwork, then view some of the stroke options available, including the new dash line corners and arrowhead features of CS5. Alright, let's start by adding some dividing lines between these type columns that we created earlier on the A3 poster. With the shape of these lines matching the visual of the mountain silhouette, I think the lines can enhance that by being different lengths also to match these different shapes. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's open up our layers panel here and make sure that we unlock our type layer, which is where those shapes are stored. And whilst we're here, we'll also turn off our guides just to make it a bit easier to see. Now I'm going to zoom in all the way down here, and whilst we're down there, let's maybe go Command Y or Control Y on the PC to go into outline mode, because we'll draw the lines first and then we'll play around with the stroke options. So make sure the type layer is selected. Let's come over to our tools and go ahead and select the line tool, okay? Now this is fairly straightforward to use. Anywhere you wish to click and drag, any direction, you can draw a straight line, okay? Just going to undo that. What we want to do is create one that matches the exact height of this middle section here. So what I'm going to do, position the cursor on the upper right hand side of our frame, click and drag all the way down to our intersection right there, okay? And we've generated a line of exactly the right length. Now this is why we're in outline mode, because we can't actually see a stroke applied to this. Now again, I'm going to go back to the main selection tool so we don't accidentally draw new lines, and we can go ahead and select this one and maybe just nudge it a millimeter or so to the right hand side. Now when it comes to alignment and basically wanting to center these lines perfectly centered between each of these elements, there are a couple of ways that we can do it. Alright, I'm going to put that back where it was. Remember that when we generated these, we drew a shape and we split it into a grid, and we made sure that we had, I think, 5 millimeters between each one. Well, knowing that half of 5 millimeters is 2.5, we could bring up our move dialog box at this point and say, horizontally, let's move 2.5 millimeters across, and as you can see, that gives us an exact center. So that's one option. You know that one now. I want to show you a different one that we haven't seen yet. Let's go ahead and cancel that. Again, I'm just going to nudge it so we can see it slightly different to the others, but it's still aligned to the top. What we can do instead is let's go ahead and select all three of these shapes, both text frames on either side of the line and the line itself, and then come on up to the align options here in the control panel, or indeed over here in the align palette. We can come down here and make sure that we have align to selection highlighted. Now everything up to this point has been aligned to artboard, and we use key object as and when we double select our key object, but this time we're going to use align to selection. When we have that done, we can come over here and say horizontally distribute the centers. Go ahead and click that. It perfectly centers it in that location for you. So very, very easy to do. You have two options there. Choose whichever one suits you at the time. Now we can switch back to preview mode, okay, so Command Y or Control Y again on the PC, and we'll just click outside to deselect everything. So our line in the middle currently has no stroke applied, so go ahead and select that, and whilst we're there, let's zoom in and view nice and closely here at the top so we can see the options that are being applied. So currently no stroke. Let's come over here into the color panel and make sure that we do have the stroke selected. Although there's nothing applied, we still need that highlighted in order to apply color in the right place. And then we'll come down to the stroke panel. Now, like we did with gradient, this has more options than we can actually see. So let's come down to gradient, make sure that we first say hide options, and then let's go to stroke and show our options. Now, if you have a large enough screen, you can have all of these open at any time, but again, we're just being compact here. So what I'm going to do is apply a default stroke at this point, go over to the weight, and let's say apply a 4-point stroke. Now by default, it's going to use the last swatch, which in this case was white. That's exactly what I need. If for some reason you have a different color, just go ahead and choose white. Let's make sure first though that we are in CMYK mode. Okay, once again, we're switching back and forth between RGB and CMYK documents. That can happen. Now, we can see that the stroke itself is actually aligned to the center of our line. So 4 points, 2 of them are being applied on the left and 2 of them on the right. That's the default that Illustrator has, and that's how it works. InDesign, oddly enough, allows you to choose which side of the line that the stroke goes on, but Illustrator, very slightly different. Now in the stroke panel, you can see that we have different cap options, okay? Currently, the cap of the line ends where the line ends, We can also choose rounded, which goes over the edge and nicely rounds off. And this is really nice if you're doing sort of wavy lines with thick strokes. And you also have a squared option, which basically takes the same distance. So 2 points is on the left-hand side of the line. It goes up an additional 2 and across and down. So sort of, it's like a rounding, but with a squared end. But for now, we're going to keep the cap precisely as it is. Now, whilst we're here, let's switch it back down to what we are going to use, which is going to be just simply half a point. Okay, I just wanted to use a thick stroke there so you could see what was going on. Now we're going to zoom down. Let's maybe fit in window and then just re-zoom so we can see what's going on over here. Basically what we want are 2 more lines. We want another one in the middle here and another one in the dead center of all 6 columns, because if we do these 2, what we can do is reflect them across the other side and save ourselves a little bit of work. So I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on the PC and drag a copy of this so it comes over and aligns dead on the top right of the next column. Okay. Now, as you'll know, or that you've probably noticed, the height is going to be different and we need it to fit the height of this particular frame. So the line will sit in the middle and come all the way down to here. 2 options that you have. We could use free transform, okay? Hit E to get free transform. You know that you could scale down. But before you do, what's the one thing you need to check? Go over into transform. Do make sure that on the flyout option here, scale stroke and effects is not turned on. If it is, and we use free transform there, we're going to scale the stroke from half a point to 0.65 or something like that. Not that it's much difference, but consistency when you're doing artwork like this is key. So do make sure, if you ever pull up free transform when you're doing a line like this that has a stroke on it, make sure that that's not selected, okay? So now that we know it's not, we could quite easily just grab our central anchor point there and drag down and it snaps into place. You can double check over here in the stroke panel, it's still set to 0.5. Now the other way to do it, if I just undo that, is instead to go to the direct selection tool. Remember, if you edit the path itself, you're not scaling anything, so the stroke width will not adjust. So with that in mind, we could deselect, come over here and just click on the bottom anchor point and simply drag that down to a line in exactly the same way. We get the same result. The stroke width doesn't change and we end up with a longer line. Okay, so whichever one of those you wish to use, that's totally up to you. So go back to the main selection tool, click on the line, and as we did a second ago, let's hold down the Shift key and click both of the text frames either side of that. Now remember, these aren't text frames at this point in time, but they will be eventually. With those 3 items selected, we're still on selection over here in the Align options. Let's go ahead and distribute those as well. Now we do need a 3rd line over here in the center. We need exactly the same option to be able to shrink it down as well. So let's do the same thing. Hold down your Option key or the Alt on the PC, drag another copy over so it aligns on the top there. We can do free transform because we know that we've got scale, stroke, and effects turned off. And this time let's drag our center point and drop it right up here so it hits our intersection there. Go back to your main selection tool. Shift select both text frames either side and once again distribute their space. Now in order to get the other 2 lines to appear over here on the other side, okay, we don't have to do the same process, stretch and everything else. Let's use a reflection. We don't need to duplicate the middle one. All we want to do is take these 2 lines, do a reflection and a copy at the same time, leaving these where they are. Okay, so select both of those lines using the Shift key. Then we'll come over to the rotate tool, but click and hold, go ahead and choose reflect. Remember all our keyboard shortcuts here that we learned earlier on. We wish to specify that this is our reflection point. So hold down your Option key, Alt key on the PC, and click to bring up your dialog box. What we want is a vertical reflection, and we also wish to hit copy. All right. As soon as we do that, click and deselect with our selection tool, you can see that we now have lines all the way across, perfectly sized, and they have a 0.5 white stroke applied. So that is now done. Let's take a look now at using dashed lines in our artwork. So what we'll do is we'll fit everything in the window, and we are actually going to focus on our flyer down here in the lower right hand side. Okay, let's zoom in on that. And we'll also go ahead and open another document that we have in our project file. So bring up your File Open dialog, go back to the desktop where you located your project files, and inside the Illustrator files folder, we're going to open this one called coupon.ai. All right. Go ahead and click open, and if you want, we can zoom in on that. Now you can see it's an artwork I've already created, basically a fictitious discount coupon, and it's got this border around the outside that we want to sort of apply a dash to that suggests that you maybe cut it out and post it in with your application or something. So what we'll do is we'll select the whole thing, it's an entire group, and we'll just copy this into memory. close the file down, and then paste it into our artwork. Now, we do want to make sure we have the right layer selected, and we'll put this on the backdrop, let's say, because if we unlock that, click on our grid here, we can see that the grid is indeed on the backdrop color. All right. With that selected, we can just go ahead and paste our artwork in, select the grid as well, and then with a no shift key selected, click on the grid once again to turn that into a key align object. And then in the align options, we can say align our coupon right and to the bottom. All right. If it's going to be cut out, we do want it to be in the bottom. It'd be very difficult to cut it out if it was in the center. So now that's in the right position, let's zoom in so we can see it nice and close. And just to be on the safe side, instead of using direct selection, what we can do is, because this is a group, we can double click on it to go into isolation mode. All right, so now every element in here is separate. We've got the background, we've got the stroke, and then we've got the graphics. And just so you know that's an option, we can double click on the graphics as well to now isolate them within the other group. All right, it's very, very cool that all of these things can be done through simple isolation. This used to be a nightmare in the past. So now that we've gone into multiple isolations, I'm just going to double click back out to the main artwork. Once again, select our coupon, double click to go into the first isolation mode. So the stroke here around the outside is what we wish to affect, and we're going to come over to the stroke panel here and apply a rather thick stroke. Let's maybe go up to, I don't know, 6 point, just so we can see what's going on. So when we did the single line, I mentioned about the alignment of the stroke being central, and you can see that the same rule does apply here. We've got 6 points, 3 points on either side. However, Illustrator, when you have a closed path, allows you to affect the alignment of the stroke. We can see that here in the stroke panel. We've currently got the first item selected, which, as you can see, is center. The next option is inside. This is the one that I like to use. If you've got a thick stroke on an object that you've created at a specific size, adding a thick stroke to it is actually essentially changing the size of that shape. So and sometimes it makes sense to put the stroke inside and then your outer dimensions remain the same. Likewise, you can switch to an outer option, which will put the thickness of the stroke outside of your shape, all right? So in this instance, what we would do is choose inside, but we're going to add a dashed line, so we really negate that there. So I just wanted to point that out because it is important when you're doing solid, thick strokes that you might want to choose inside or outside. So I'm going to set that back to center, and I'm maybe going to knock this down to something a little less intense. Maybe 2 or 3 point is quite enough. What we want to do here is turn on the dashed line option, okay? Now, when we turn this on, again, it depends on whether you've played around with Illustrator before. You may have one or other of these selected. I'm going to make sure that the first one is highlighted. This is how Illustrator used to work. If you applied a dashed line, it basically was created evenly throughout the entire shape. So what we're getting here is a 12-point dash with a 12-point gap. That's the default, and that is applied consistently. Doesn't matter if you have corners or lines, different shapes or anything else, it's applied evenly around the whole shape, which then gives you these odd-looking corners, okay? Now, if you've ever used dash lines before in Illustrator, this may well have been a frustration. If you have a dash line, it'd be very cool if the corner itself was even and it had like a sort of 6 point on this side, 6 point down here, and when you got across to this side, it also had 6 point here, 6 point here. So you get these nice definite corners. Well, that's never worked before, but now this is built into Illustrator CS5. If you come over here and click on the second option, you can see that it's called Align Dashes to Corners. So if we go ahead and turn that on, you can see the difference. It's a lot neater, and it's also aligned everything else. Not only are the corners nice, but we've got 3 even strokes here, we've got 2 down here, we've got 3 across the bottom. Now, it does look slightly strange because there are much bigger gaps here, so really the 12 point is not working for us here. So let's just change that. We have the ability to add multiple dash and gap values, okay? So let's maybe change our first dash here to, say, 6 point. Say OK, and maybe we'll change the gap so that it's an even 4 point. All right, that looks a little bit better, but again, because we have this align option turned on, we've now got nice, even and consistent corners all the way around, and this looks a lot better when it comes to artwork. So if I deselect that, you can see the finished result. So let's go back out of isolation mode there because our coupon update has been done. We can zoom back down and see, yeah, that looks very nice there in the corner of our artwork. Now we're going to take a look at some new features again in the stroke panel of CS5, and to do that we're going to open a different Illustrator file. So bring up your open dialog box, and from the desktop locate your project files, go into the Illustrator files, and let's open this one called lecomap.ai. If we go ahead and open that, you can see it's a map that I've created. It's slightly stylized, it's not true to scale or anything else, but it's based around the town of Lecco, which is in the Italian lakes. And what I've done is on the Legends layer, I've created a couple of red dots which would suggest where our hotel and our bike shop might be for our bike tour company. Again, this is fictitious, but it gives us a really nice idea of how to use some of our tools. I'm going to zoom in here on that area so we can see where we are. And what we want to do is create a nice curved line which comes out from the hotel and points down at this location with an arrowhead on the end. All right. Now, arrowheads have been a function inside of Illustrator for a long time, but they always required an effect or something for you to do manually and construct and scale, that kind of thing. Well, arrowheads are now built into the stroke panel. You can see that down here on the right hand side. So what we want to do is create a curved line that comes from hotel and drops down into the center here. So for that, we're going to use a tool we haven't seen yet. We're going to come up to the line tool. Now the arc tool, we can draw in two different angles, basically. If we position our cursor on the outside of hotel, you see our smart guides are very nicely centering it on the word. That's very cool. As we click and drag downwards though, towards our red dot here, the way the arc tool draws, you can see it draws an arc downwards. So what we need to do, undo that, we're going to start from our red dot, dead in the center, click and drag upwards and come towards the center of hotel here. And you'll see that this actually changes the arc itself so it's on the outside of where we were and gives us the shape that we need. All right, let's go ahead and do exactly the same down here for our bike shop legend. Click in the center of the red shape, drag up and make sure we center on the word bike shop, and you can choose how far away from the outside that actually is. All right. So we've got our two arcs. Let's go back to the main selection tool so we don't create any more. Hold down the shift key and select both of them so we can edit them both at the same time. Now the first thing we'll do over here in the stroke panel is change the weight of these. 1 point for my liking is a little too thick, so let's make that about 0.75. And whilst we're here, just for attention to detail, what I'm going to do is apply a rounded cap. Even though we're going to apply an arrowhead down here, it is very nice if we just round off the edges, and what I'll do is zoom up there so you can see it. Just that little attention to detail. We don't need a squared edge there. It's up to you if you want to apply it. I like to see little things like that. Okay, so let's just scroll down here and zoom down into place. All right, the two of them are still highlighted. What we'll do is come down to the arrowheads option and apply either an arrowhead to the start or to the end. Well, remember the way that the arc tool forced us into drawing the shape, basically the start and finish point, we had to start here and finish up here. We want to make sure that our arrowheads are applied to the start, okay? So the first option here is the start. We can click and choose an arrowhead. What I'm going to do is maybe choose arrow 2. That's the style I'm looking for. Perfect. Applies it exactly where it needs to be. A couple of other options that we can choose here. The align option. Basically, we can choose whether the arrowhead aligns to the very end of the path, which is exactly what we do need. You also have the ability to extend it beyond the end of the path. So that's another option you might use in future. Let's go ahead and keep it as it is. What we can also do is affect the scale factor here. We can choose how big the arrowhead is in comparison to the width of the stroke. So I'm going to knock that down to around 70% there. I think that will actually do the job for us. So if I come over here now and click to deselect, we've got pretty good looking lines. We've got a nice smooth curve that was constructed using the arc tool. We've rounded off the edges there just as an attention to detail, but more importantly, slap bang in the middle of our red dot, we've got a beautifully scaled and very editable, as you can see here in the panel, arrowhead which has been applied exactly where we need it. So at this point you could save this and update the map if you want to, but hopefully that's given you a really good idea of how the arrowheads function inside of Illustrator CS5.